Hello all and welcome to part 3 of the CT70 build. Today we're going to be tearing down the 70cc Honda engine.
Here we go guys, this is the heart of the CT70 project, the 70cc single cylinder engine that comes out of this bike. It's also present in a lot of other bikes. This style of engine's been carried through from 1969 pretty much to the present day with minor upgrades along the way. But I thought it would be a cool video to strip down this engine and see what's inside and check that it's all good. We start this engine teardown with the top end, so you have these 4 nuts which hold your cylinder cap on and essentially the whole top end together. I found out very quickly that this engine hadn't been apart because these were very stuck, and as you see right there, I managed to damage the cylinder head straight away. So starting off on a good foot, we continue to pull the engine apart. You've got this bolt that runs through the centre of the cam, and then I go to take off the tappet covers. A quick tip here, don't use an adjustable, go with the exact size spanner, makes life so much easier. You can see with a proper spanner it comes straight off. So we continue to pull parts off, and I as you saw, struggle to get this cap off. So with some persuasion we pull off this cap and have a quick look.
Snapped a fin on that.
You can see once again there I mentioned the snap fin. Not to worry, these are very replaceable parts, so it's a small problem overall. And you'll notice throughout this build, as with all my teardowns, I bag everything up and label it, so when it comes to reassembly it's nice and easy. For anyone doing this for the first time, it may seem daunting. I think when you do your first engine it's always a bit of a will I ever get it back together moment, but like I say, take your time, and I really emphasise on the need to label parts and bag them up, and even if you film yourself, because if you get stuck on the reassembly you've got nice video footage showing you how exactly it came apart. With the engine spun around, we can now start to look inside the engine and work towards that. So first off is the cylinder head, and this is held by this small bolt on the side. So with that out, you can tap the head off, and this will give you your first look at the condition of the engine. So with that cylinder head off, let's take a quick look at what it looks like. So first impressions, a load of soot. Looks like it's very, very rich. I think maybe the rings were blowing by and oil's made its way up to the cylinder head. They're very coked up, you can see here. And looking inside the barrel, it looks the same. Very gummed up, not running very well. So we'll continue the strip down, get that barrel off, and have a closer look at the piston. As you do. Now we've seen the cylinder head, it will be good to see the state of this piston. So there's a small roller on the side of the cylinder which comes out, and then once again another one of these bolts, and pretty much it will slide off these 4 studs. And you can see, pull it off slowly, making sure you feed your cam chain through so that doesn't get caught on anything, and you're revealed the piston in all its glory. So once again with the piston, you can see we've got a huge amount of carbon build up on the top. The actual piston itself, the skirts of the piston and the rings, all look to be in okay condition, and in the barrel it's very, very similar, to be honest. There's not a huge amount of wear. These iron barrels are super solid, so normally any problems you see are straight on the piston, but yeah, it's not looking that bad, to be honest. So let's now get the piston off, and as with all pistons there's a small circlip and you can push the gudgeon pin straight out. One thing that's cool to pay attention to is the original Honda markings on the piston. So that's a really cool little touch there. Just not that it's going to be used, but I'll probably get that blasted up and keep that on the shelf as a little souvenir of this build. At this point, my thoughts for this bike are, it was very low mileage, 1800 miles. I'm assuming that is correct, but it looks like it's had a pretty hard life. It looks like oil sat in the engine, be that through oil coming up through the rings or the valves in the head leaking, pulling oil back down, or maybe someone putting oil in the fuel thinking it's a two-stroke. Either way, that top end is massively gummed up for a bike with such low miles. Since this bike has sat for so long, there's always going to be a bit of an issue taking bolts out. Very rarely do I strip an engine and every single bolt comes out perfectly. Water gets behind the threads and naturally these bolts seize in place. Especially these JIS Phillips head bolts, they can be a bit of a pain. But we get them all backed off and we're going to take a look inside the clutch. So we slide off that clutch cover to reveal the clutch basket and shifting mechanism. You can also see your kickstart lever on the rear of the engine. But you have this small assembly here which works as part of your gear shifting mechanism. So we slowly take those apart and I then beautifully strip all of the heads on these bolts. To be completely honest, I think I maybe had the wrong type of bit, but I'm putting a new clutch in it anyway, so I was down to business, drilled it out and pulled that cap straight off. If anything, it's a great lesson for anyone looking at these Japanese engines. Make sure that the type of bit you're using is correct. Make sure it fits perfectly because it avoids going through the pain that I've had to go through just there. With a few blips of the impact, we pull off the clutch assembly and we are left with a few pieces to come out.
Perfect example of right tool for the job. Look how much easier that is with some vertical ones. Pushing it force straight on top of it, perfect. As we have the engine apart and the clutch basket off, I thought it would be quite cool to give a bit of an insight into the shifting of these engines. It's a 3-speed semi-automatic and it's a very cool but functional system. So up here we have our shift barrel which goes down into our gearbox behind this cover here, and pretty much down here we have the opposite side of your gear shifter. So as you would click a gear, this will turn and you'll pull this barrel round and select another gear. What is cool, at the time you twist this, you are also depressing the clutch. So as this twists, you depress the clutch, the selector allows the gear to be selected, and then once it's clicked back into place, this releases the clutch pressure and then allows you to apply power into that gear. So it's a really cool system. This hook sort of setup is quite common in engines, but it's interesting the way that it depresses the clutch just so you get a seamless, smooth ride. As mentioned at the start of the video, these engines and the architecture of them is very common. If you look at a modern day CRF 110 or something like that, you'll see that they are extremely similar. Obviously, electronic ignitions come along and the engines have had small revisions, but the fundamentals are the same. So this semi-automatic principle has been carried through many, many bikes. For example, the Cub 90 is a similar platform, and yeah, you see it everywhere. If you're buying second-hand parts or upgrades, you will notice they are all very similar and do fit a lot of engines. Nonetheless, always be careful because there will be small differences. As we continue the strip down, we are pulling parts off. So there's this bolt behind that goes into the rear of the shifter barrel, and we are pulling the circlip off the kickstart shaft. And we're working towards the point where we can split the cases. So you see here the kickstart spring, the kickstart lever there, and just pulling all these bits out slowly. The cam chain tensioner you can see here, and the cam chain arm. Get those all out of the way and bagged up so we can split these cases. At this point we sadly come across our second broken bolt. In these two centre cases you have the same set of JIS bolts and they all came apart really well bar one. So let's tackle this broken bolt. So only one of them didn't want to budge, which is an absolute pain. The number one thing is making sure you have the right screw size, so the JIS screws. making sure you have a good fit, otherwise, as I found out in the past, you can strip them so easily. But we've got one that's not budging loose. I'm going to try and get in there. If not, it's going to be a case of getting the mole grips on it and trying to work it loose. It did crack off a little bit, so I'm hopeful that it will come out. But it's part of these old engines. They're never smooth. You see these videos of people just stripping them apart really, really quickly. Doesn't always happen, unfortunately. So we'll try and get this bolt out. So my approach for this was to obviously try and use a screwdriver and get something to fit. When that failed, I got a great grip with mole grips, but had nowhere to turn it. And then I thought, let's bang in a torque piece and try and make the most of that turfed up head. Sadly, none of those worked, and you can hear me stripping it, so I resorted to the drill. All I had to do was drill the head off, and that would give me the clearance to pull the bolt through afterwards. And as you can see here, that worked well, and we could get the last of the bolts out. And that, guys, is what a 54-year-old bolt looks like when it's tucked away inside a nice engine. So gives you a good indicator that this engine hasn't actually come cases split before, which is a good thing because it means that it hasn't actually seen much use. But yeah, they were really difficult to get off. Bolts are now out, so we can split the cases. As per the manual, it recommends hitting on your side of the crank and gearbox shaft, and that will slowly pull the cases apart. And you can see here it slowly breaks apart and you're able to lift one of the cases off. At this point you can then see all your gearbox shafts, your gearbox and the crank sitting in one side of the case. We can now pull off or pull out the crank with its two bearings, along with the gearbox shafts and kickstart shaft. At this point you've got your crankshaft out and your cases are split. It's a good time to have a quick check for any, I don't know, broken pieces, bits of metal that you wouldn't want to see, and just have a good general inspection. Have a look around your gearbox. It's difficult to operate when you don't have two cases on because you get a bit of misalignment, but give it a good visual check, and as you pull each part out, just give it a once over, because there's nothing worse than coming to rebuild this in however long and realising that you've got a broken part. So great time to check and make sure it's all as you expect. Pulling the gearbox out is pretty self-explanatory. I like to try and grab the whole thing as one unit and pull it out together just so it stays intact, and then I give everything a quick wipe down just so I can visually see if there's anything I'm missing. With both crankcases now completely empty, the last job to do is knock the seals and bearings out. We can do that carefully with a sort of drift and a flattened screwdriver to lift the seals out, just being careful not to scratch cases or any delicate surfaces. And then once that's done, we can wash them up. On this engine there are a few seals that need pulling out. Here is the gear selector or your gear shifter seal. We've got the sprocket or gearbox output shaft seal, and then you have your stator seal, which is on your stator plate. With those out, we can then knock out the bearings with the end of a drift, nice and easy, and they slide straight out. So guys, that brings us to the end of today's video. I know that was a shorter one, just stripping down the engine, but I thought it was cool to capture it, and it's always exciting to see what's inside. We can definitely see, looking back, that the reason this didn't run was purely to the top end of the engine. The valves are all coked up, they're covered in a gunk and a heavy carbon deposit, which really isn't going to help. But overall, I think for 54-year-old engine cases, they're in really good nick, so very happy with that. Next up, I'm going to take these, clean them, give them a good rinse down, lightly remove that gasket, and send them for vapor blasting. I'll catch you in the next video, where we'll hopefully be rebuilding some parts and cracking on with this build. Once again, hope you've enjoyed it. Take it easy, and I'll catch you in the next one.